The sound wasn't loud. That was the first strange thing. No crash, no bang, just a soft, almost polite click, the kind of sound a door makes when it stops resisting. The balcony door, pushed by a breeze that didn't feel like a breeze at all, eased open in the dark. And inside the apartment, a little girl kept sleeping, unaware that one small, ordinary detail had just shifted everything. Some stories don't begin with danger announced. They begin with danger slipping in quietly, hoping no one notices. If stories like this touch something familiar in you, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps keep these moments alive without breaking their silence. The apartment was on the 7th floor, not high enough to inspire constant fear, not low enough to forget it existed, just high enough that people stopped thinking about it after a while. The kind of place where parents eventually relax, routines take over, and doors become habits instead of barriers. The balcony faced the city, a patchwork of lights and distant sounds, softened by the late hour. The girl's mother used to stand there some nights years ago, hands resting on the railing, listening to the world breathe. But that was before illness, before hospitals that smelled like disinfectant and endings, before the apartment learned how to be quiet in a different way. Now the apartment belonged to the girl and her father, and even he wasn't home that night. He had checked the door before leaving. He always did. Locked, closed, handle firm. He remembered the motion clearly because it was muscle memory, because it was the last thing he did before turning off the lights. What he didn't remember was a tiny detail. The latch didn't fully catch. It rested there, convincing enough, safe enough, until it wasn't. The girl slept in her room, curled slightly on her side, one leg tangled in the blanket. Her breathing was slow and uneven, the kind of deep sleep that comes after a long day of school, homework, and asking questions no one knows how to answer anymore. Her hair spread across the pillow like it always did, messy and soft. The nightlight cast a faint glow, barely touching the corners of the room. Everything felt contained, normal. The breeze came again, stronger this time. Or maybe it wasn't stronger at all. Maybe the latch simply gave up. The balcony door opened wider. Cold air slid in, brushing against the living room curtains. They moved, just slightly, enough to whisper. A soft sound, barely there. The kind of sound that doesn't wake adults, but sometimes reaches children in strange ways. The girl stirred, not awake, not asleep. That fragile space in between, where the mind drifts and listens. She dreamed of her mother. Not as she was at the end, never that. In the dream, her mother was standing in the kitchen, back turned, humming quietly. The same melody she used to hum while washing dishes, the same one the girl could never quite remember during the day. In the dream, the sound felt close, comforting, real. The girl shifted again, brow furrowing. Something didn't feel right. The dream wavered. The humming softened, almost fading, replaced by another sensation, coolness, air moving where it shouldn't. Her eyes fluttered open. At first, she didn't know why. Children don't wake up thinking in sentences. They wake up in feelings. And the feeling that filled her chest wasn't fear exactly. It was wrongness. Like when a room looks the same, but something is missing. Or when a sound you expect doesn't come. She sat up slowly, blanket slipping down. The nightlight showed her door, her dresser, her favorite book on the shelf. Everything was where it should be. But the air felt different, colder. She hugged her arms to her body. Then she heard it. The curtains, not loud, not dramatic, just a gentle brush, back and forth, like someone breathing too close. She froze. Her heart picked up speed, but her body stayed still. She had learned, somehow, that stillness sometimes mattered. She swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood. The floor was cool beneath her feet, She took one step, then another, moving toward her bedroom door. Each step felt heavier than it should, like the air itself resisted her. The hallway was dark, the living room beyond it darker still, but from there came a faint rectangle of nightlight, the city, spilling in where it wasn't supposed to. The balcony door was open. She knew that instantly, even before she could fully see it. The shape of the room felt wrong, open in a way that rooms shouldn't be at night. She hesitated. Every instinct told her to stop, to call for her father, to turn back. But her father wasn't there. The apartment was silent except for the curtains, still whispering, still moving. She took another step. As she did, something else happened. Something small, something easy to dismiss. The picture frame on the hallway wall tilted. It was an old photo, one of the few that hadn't been packed away. Her mother sitting on the couch, the girl beside her, both smiling at something off camera. The frame had always been straight, always. Her father fixed it once, carefully as if it mattered more than other things. Now it shifted, just a fraction, catching the girl's eye. She stopped. Her heart skipped, then thudded hard. She stared at the frame, then at the living room beyond. The open door felt suddenly farther away, more dangerous. She reached out without thinking and touched. The wall, grounding herself. The texture felt familiar, solid, real. In her chest, the feeling changed. Not fear, something else. A pressure, like when someone stands behind you and you don't see them, but you know. A presence without weight, without shape. She whispered, barely a sound. "Mom?" No answer. Of course not. The apartment didn't respond, but the curtain stilled for just a second, then moved again, slower this time. The girl took a step back. Another. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She simply obeyed the quiet urge that had risen inside her, sudden and firm. Go back. Now. As she turned, her sock caught slightly on the rug. She stumbled, arms flailing, balance tipping forward. For a split second, she imagined herself falling, hitting the floor, the noise echoing through the empty apartment. But she didn't fall. Something shifted. Her foot slid instead of catching, just enough to keep her upright. She steadied herself, breath shaking. She didn't question it. Children, accept help without needing to name it. She hurried back to her room and closed the door behind her, gently, as if loud sounds might undo whatever fragile safety remained. She climbed back into bed, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Her heart raced, her thoughts tangled, but slowly the pressure in her chest eased. She didn't sleep right away. She stared at the ceiling, listening, waiting. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time blurred. In the living room, the breeze strengthened again. The balcony door swung wider, then slammed softly against the wall, held there by the wind. Outside, traffic moved far below, unaware. The railing stood firm, cold, impersonal. Inside the girl's room, the air remained still. Eventually, the building shifted. Wind changed direction. The door moved again, inch by inch, until it rested almost closed. Not latched, but closer, safer than before. When the father came home hours later, tired and distracted, he noticed the chill first. He frowned, confused, and walked into the living room. The balcony door stood ajar. His stomach dropped. He rushed to close it, locking it firmly this time. His hands trembled as he checked it twice, 3 times. He stood there longer than necessary, staring out into the night, imagining things he didn't want to imagine. Then he checked his daughter. She slept peacefully, turned toward the wall, blanket tucked around her shoulders. He exhaled, relief flooding him so fast it almost hurt. He brushed her hair back, gently, and whispered an apology she couldn't hear. As he turned to leave, he noticed the picture frame in the hallway. crooked. He straightened it without thinking, then paused. A strange feeling settled over him, heavy and quiet. For a moment, he could have sworn the apartment felt watched over, not watched, guarded. He shook his head, tired. Grief did that, made you feel things that weren't there. But as he turned off the hallway light, the frame caught the glow just right. And in the glass, for the briefest instant, he thought he saw something else reflected. Not a face, not a figure, just the sense that someone who loved his daughter very much had been awake that night and hadn't looked away. The girl woke up before her alarm the next morning, the way she sometimes did after a dream she couldn't quite remember. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the pale light slipping through the edges of the curtains. For a moment, everything felt normal. Too normal. Then her chest tightened, just slightly as the memory of the night returned. Not as images, but as sensations. Cold air. A wrong feeling. The soft whisper of fabric moving when it shouldn't. She sat up and looked around her room. Nothing had changed. Her books were stacked the same way. Her shoes waited by the door. The nightlight was still on, though its glow had faded against the daylight. But she felt watched in a way that wasn't frightening, more like accompanied. She swung her legs out of bed and padded into the hallway. The picture frame was straight again, perfectly straight. That bothered her more than if it had still been crooked. She stopped in front of it, staring at the photo. Her mother's smile was frozen there, gentle and familiar. The girl reached out and touched the glass with her fingertips. "Thank you," she whispered, without fully knowing why. Her father was in the kitchen, standing too still for someone who had already poured coffee. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. Relief, flickering across his face so quickly he didn't bother hiding it. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, hands resting on her shoulders. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked. She nodded, then hesitated. "The door," she said softly. His hands tightened. "What door?" "The outside one." It was open. His breath caught. He searched her face, looking for signs of a nightmare, a child's imagination running wild, but her eyes were steady, certain. "I didn't go near it," she added quickly, as if that mattered. "I almost did, but I didn't." He pulled her into a hug, holding her longer than usual. His heart beat fast against her cheek. "You did the right thing," he murmured. "You always do." But later, when she was at school and the apartment sat empty again, the quiet returned. The kind of quiet that settles after something important has already happened. The father replayed the night in his mind while at work, unable to focus. He remembered checking the door, remembered the sound of the latch. He was sure of it. And yet, it hadn't held. That thought followed him all day, heavy and unsettling. Not because of what could have happened, but because of what hadn't. That evening, he tested the door again, over and over. He even called maintenance, embarrassed by how insistent he sounded. The man assured him nothing was wrong. Old latch. Happens sometimes? Easy explanation. Easy explanations don't always feel true. That night, the father slept lightly. Every sound pulled him halfway, awake. The hum of the refrigerator, a car passing outside, the building settling. But nothing happened. The balcony door stayed closed. The curtains didn't move. In the girl's room, she dreamed again. This time, her mother stood on the balcony. Not near the edge. Never that. She stood between the door and the railing, one hand resting on the frame, the other raised slightly as if signaling, "Stay back." The city lights glowed behind her, blurred and distant. Wind moved her hair, but her expression was calm, certain. The girl didn't try to go to her. She just watched. In the dream, her mother didn't speak. She didn't need to. The message was clear without words. Some things were still being handled. The next few days passed quietly. School, homework, dinner. Routine rebuilt itself the way it always did. But small things began to happen. Things easy to ignore if you weren't looking for them. The balcony door clicked shut more firmly than before, even when pushed by strong wind. The curtains tangled themselves just enough to block the opening when the door was cracked. Once, a neighbor mentioned hearing a noise late at night, like someone walking on the balcony above, even though no one lived there who stayed up that late. The girl noticed these things. She didn't talk about them. Children learn quickly which truths adults aren't ready to hear. One afternoon, while doing homework at the dining table, she dropped her pencil. It rolled toward the living room, stopping, right at the threshold, as if an invisible line had been drawn. She stared at it, then retrieved a different pencil instead. That night, a storm rolled in without warning. Wind battered the building, rattling windows, howling through the narrow spaces between structures. The father moved around the apartment, checking locks, closing blinds. He hesitated at the balcony door, hand resting on the handle longer than necessary. "Stay closed," he muttered, half joking, half serious. The storm intensified. Rain lashed against the glass. Thunder echoed somewhere far above the city. The girl lay in bed, eyes open, listening. Storms used to scare her more before. Now they felt busy, distracting, as if something else was paying attention so she didn't have to. A sudden gust slammed into the side of the building. The balcony door shuddered. The latch held. In the hallway, the picture frame rattled softly, then settled. The girl closed her eyes. Outside, the wind pressed hard against the door, testing it again and again. Inside, nothing moved. The apartment held its breath. Somewhere between the thunder and the quiet, the girl felt that familiar pressure in her chest. Not fear, not warmth, something in between, a reminder. You're not alone. And the storm passed. When morning came, the city looked washed clean. The balcony stood empty, harmless. The door remained closed. The father watched his daughter eat breakfast, laughing at something on her phone, alive and unaware of just how close the night had once come to changing everything. He didn't know why, but he found himself standing at the balcony, whispering softly into the air. "Thank you." No one answered. But the curtains stirred just once, in a room with no breeze at all. The third night after the storm, the silence returned heavier than before. Not empty, weighted, the kind that presses against the ears until you start noticing your own breathing. The apartment lights were off except for the small lamp in the living room, left on the way the father always left it now, as if darkness had become something to negotiate with instead of accept. Nothing was wrong. And that, somehow, was the problem. If this story keeps you close, stay with it. Subscribe, leave a like, and let it continue quietly beside you. The girl lay awake in bed, staring at the faint outline of her ceiling. She wasn't afraid. That surprised her. A week ago, a storm like this quiet would have made her pull the blanket up to her ears. Now she listened instead. Listened the way her mother used to tell her to listen when something felt important, not with her ears alone, with her whole body. The air felt paused. From the living room came the soft hum of electricity, the lamp, the refrigerator cycling on and off. Familiar sounds, anchors. But beneath them, there was something else. A tension so slight it almost didn't exist. The balcony door didn't move. That was unusual. Even on calm nights, there was always something. Air, pressure, the building breathing, the curtains responding. Tonight, nothing. The door stood perfectly still, as if held in place by more than a latch. The girl turned onto her side. Her eyes drifted to the faint glow under her bedroom door. She didn't intend to get up. truly. But the feeling returned. The same one as before, not a pull, a suggestion. She slipped out of bed. Her feet touched the floor silently. She opened her door just enough to see the hallway. The lamp's light stretched across the floor, stopping just short of her room. The picture frame caught it again, reflecting softly. She stepped into the hallway. As she did, the lamp flickered. Just once, a blink, enough to make her stop. She looked at it, heart steady, curious rather than scared. The light returned immediately, solid. She waited. Nothing else happened. She continued. The living room felt larger at night. The furniture cast long, familiar shadows. The balcony door stood closed, locked, exactly where it should be. And yet the girl didn't relax. The feeling hadn't gone away. She approached slowly. Halfway across the room, she stopped, her gaze fixed on the floor near the door. Something was there. A small object, barely noticeable. Her father's keys. They shouldn't have been there. He always left them on the counter. Always. He was strict about it now, about routines, about things staying where they belonged. The keys lay near the balcony door as if they had been placed there deliberately. She crouched down and picked them up. Cold metal, real, heavy in her palm. As she did, the feeling in her chest sharpened. Don't open it. She didn't know how she knew. She just did. She stood and backed away from the door, keys clutched tightly. Her eyes never left the handle. She took one step back, then another. Behind her, the lamp flickered again. This time it stayed dimmer. The girl's breath caught. The room seemed to lean inward, shadows deepening at the edges, not threatening, focused, like everything had narrowed down to one choice. She turned and walked quickly back toward the hallway. The moment she crossed the threshold, the lamp brightened to normal. She stopped, heart pounding now. She looked back. The living room appeared unchanged, calm, innocent. She carried the keys to the kitchen and placed them on the counter where they belonged. Then she returned to her room and closed the door, hands shaking just slightly as she climbed back into bed. She didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, her father noticed the keys immediately. "They were here?" he asked, confused, lifting them from the counter. The girl nodded. "I found them by the door." His face went pale. "The balcony door?" "Yes." He swallowed hard. "Did you open it?" She shook her head. "No, I didn't." He didn't ask why. He didn't ask how she knew not to. He just pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly, longer than necessary. "I'm glad," he whispered. He didn't go to work that day. Instead, he stayed, home, restless, moving from room to room, checking things that didn't need checking. The latch, the windows, the railing, everything was fine. Perfect even. Too perfect. That afternoon, a neighbor knocked. An older woman from the apartment across the hall. She held a small potted plant, looking uneasy. "I don't want to sound strange," she said, lowering her voice, "but did you hear anything last night? On your balcony?" The father felt his stomach drop. "No," he said carefully. "Why?" She hesitated. "I thought I heard footsteps, slow ones, like someone pacing. But when I looked out, there was no one." The girl watched from behind her father, heart pounding. The neighbor's eyes flicked to her for a moment, then softened. "Well," the woman added, forcing a smile, "it's probably nothing. Old buildings make noises." Probably nothing. That night, the father dreamed. He dreamed of the balcony. He stood in the living room, unable to move, watching the door open inch by inch. Wind poured in, strong and cold, carrying city noise and something else. Urgency. On the balcony stood his wife, not sick, not weak, solid, alert. She didn't look at him. She looked past him, toward their daughter's room. He tried to speak, couldn't. She raised one hand, not to wave, but to stop him. A clear, unmistakable gesture. Then she stepped forward, placing herself between the open door and the hallway. He woke with a gasp. The apartment was silent. The balcony door closed, locked. He got out of bed and checked on his daughter. She slept peacefully, curled around her pillow. He brushed her hair back, just as he always did, and felt tears sting his eyes. "I see it now," he whispered into the quiet room. "I didn't before, but I do now." The nights that followed grew calmer. Not empty, stable. The keys stayed where they belonged. The latch held firm. The curtains behaved like curtains again. But the girl still felt it sometimes. That presence, that awareness. Strongest when she was close to the balcony, especially at night. One evening, as she did homework at the table, she felt it sharply. She looked up, heart racing, eyes drawn to the door. It was closed, locked. Still, she stood and walked over, placing her hand flat against the glass. The city reflected back at her. Lights, movement, life going on. In the reflection, just for a second, she thought she saw another shape, not a face, not a body, just the sense of someone standing where the reflection couldn't quite show. She smiled, softly, just a little. "I know," she whispered. "You can rest." The pressure eased. Outside, a breeze passed by without testing the door at all. The first thing that changed was how the apartment sounded. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone would point out. But the girl noticed. She always did. Sounds that used to echo slightly now felt absorbed, as if the walls had learned to listen better. Footsteps from upstairs softened. The distant traffic blended into a steady hum instead of sharp interruptions. Even the balcony, once a place of quiet tension, seemed to settle into itself, like a held breath finally released. But safety, she was learning, didn't mean absence. It meant vigilance without panic. If this quiet kind of protection resonates with you, staying close to this story, subscribing and leaving a like, helps it keep unfolding just as gently. The father didn't say it out loud, but he felt it too. A shift. Not relief exactly. More like an understanding. He began doing small things differently without realizing why. He stopped placing chairs near the balcony door. He moved a side table away from the railing. He checked the latch once instead of 5 times, trusting it in a way he hadn't since that night. Trust was returning, carefully, like something fragile that didn't want to be rushed. The girl returned to her routines, school projects, friends, laughing at things that had nothing to do with danger or doors or wind. She seemed lighter. And yet, sometimes, when she stood near the balcony during the day, she felt that familiar pressure again. Not warning, not fear, but readiness. As if the world was reminding her that calm didn't mean careless. One afternoon, she came home earlier than usual. The apartment was empty. Her father wouldn't be back for another hour. Sunlight filled the living room, warm and harmless, painting long shapes across the floor. The balcony door was closed, the latch firm. Everything looked safe. She dropped her backpack and went to the kitchen for a snack. As she reached for the cabinet, she heard it. A sound so small it almost escaped notice. A soft scrape, not outside, inside. She froze, hand still on the cabinet handle. Her heart didn't race. It slowed, focused. The sound came again, from the living room. She stepped quietly into the doorway. Nothing moved. The curtains hung still. The furniture sat exactly where it should. The balcony door remained closed, locked. And yet, the scrape came a third time, this time closer to the floor, like something shifting under slight pressure. Her eyes dropped. The rug. the edge of it had moved, just a few centimeters, as if someone had nudged it back into place after it had crept too close to the door. She stared, breath shallow. The rug had always been crooked. Her father never noticed. Her mother used to straighten it with her foot when she walked by. The girl had inherited that habit without realizing it. She stepped forward and adjusted the rug the rest of the way, aligning it neatly with the floor tiles. As she did, the pressure in her chest eased again. "Okay," she murmured, not to the room, but to the feeling. "I see." That night, the building lost power. It wasn't dramatic. No explosion, no storm, just a sudden, collective pause. Lights went out across the block. Elevators stopped. The city dimmed. The apartment plunged into darkness. The father cursed softly, then reached for his phone's flashlight. "Stay here," he told his daughter, though she hadn't moved. "I'll get the candles." As he crossed the living room, something pulled at his attention. A sense of wrongness, sharp and immediate. The balcony door handle was turned, not open, just turned. His stomach dropped. He rushed forward, snapping the flashlight beam onto the door. The latch held, barely. He locked it firmly, hands shaking. "Dad?" the girl called from behind him. Not scared, alert. He turned. "It's okay," he said, though his voice didn't quite believe him. "Everything's okay." The power outage stretched on. The apartment filled with candlelight, flickering, unreliable. Shadows grew longer, more active, the kind of light that plays tricks on tired minds. The girl sat on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, watching the balcony door. The pressure returned. Stronger this time, not danger, anticipation. Outside, the city hummed in the dark. Voices carried farther. Somewhere below, a car alarm wailed, then died. Wind picked up, testing buildings, probing weak points. The balcony door shuddered. The father moved in front of it instinctively, standing between the door and his daughter, just as her mother had in his dream. The thought struck him so hard it stole his breath. The handle rattled, once, twice. The latch strained, metal protesting under pressure it hadn't faced before. The girl stood. "Dad," she said calmly. "Move!" He stared at her. "What?" "Please," she said. "Move to the side." Something in her voice made him obey without thinking. He stepped aside, heart hammering. The handle turned again, and then nothing. The pressure in the room shifted sharply like a sudden change in altitude. The air felt dense, focused on one point. The girl stepped forward and placed her hand on the glass. She didn't push. She didn't pull. She simply stood there. The handle slowly rotated back to its resting position. The door stopped moving. The wind outside howled once, frustrated, then moved on. The father stared, unable to speak. The girl lowered her hand and turned to him. "It's done," she said softly. "What is?" he asked. She shook her head. "I don't know, just that." They slept together on the couch that night, candles burned low. Neither of them dreamed. The next morning, the maintenance team inspected the door again, replaced the latch entirely this time. New metal, stronger design, secure. "Should have been done years ago," the man muttered. The father nodded, though a strange sadness settled in his chest, as if something important was being put to rest. That evening, the girl stood on the balcony for the first time since the night it opened. The door remained open behind her, but she didn't feel exposed. The railing felt solid beneath her hands. The city stretched out below, alive and indifferent. The pressure was gone, not faded, completed. She closed her eyes and breathed in the air. For the first time, the balcony felt like just a balcony. "Thank you," she whispered into the open space. No breeze answered, no movement. But inside, Something settled deeply, permanently. That night, the picture frame in the hallway tilted for the last time. The father noticed it and smiled softly as he straightened it. No fear in his hands anymore. The apartment slept. The first night after the latch was replaced felt different in a way neither of them expected. Not lighter, not heavier, just quieter. Like the apartment had finally decided what kind of silence it wanted to keep. The girl lay awake longer than usual, staring at the shadow where the ceiling met the wall, listening to the building breathe. Pipes settling, distant traffic, normal sounds, and beneath them, nothing else. That absence should have been comforting. Instead, it made her chest ache with a feeling she didn't yet have a name for. Some stories don't end with danger leaving. They end with guardians stepping back. If this kind of story stays with you, stay close. Subscribe and leave a like, quietly, the way protection often works. She turned onto her side and closed her eyes, and for the first time in days, she dreamed of something ordinary. A school hallway, laughter. Her mother wasn't there. Not because she was gone, but because she didn't need to be. Morning came gently. Sunlight slipped through the curtains without resistance. The balcony door remained closed, solid, unquestionable. The father noticed how he didn't feel the urge to check it right away. That unsettled him more than the fear ever had. He made breakfast, watching his daughter move around the kitchen, barefoot, humming a tune she didn't realize she was humming. It took him a moment to recognize it. The same melody, the one his wife used to hum at the sink. His throat tightened, but he said nothing. Later that day, the girl stayed home alone again. Not because she had to, because she wanted to. The apartment felt stable now, like a place that could be trusted. She sat on the floor of the living room, drawing, her back to the couch, her eyes occasionally lifting to the balcony door. It didn't call to her anymore. It simply existed. At some point, she felt it again. Not pressure, not warning, but a subtle pull of attention, like someone gently clearing their throat behind you. She didn't turn around. She spoke instead, softly, without looking up. "I'm okay." The feeling lingered for a moment, then softened. The air warmed slightly, as if sunlight had shifted even though it hadn't. She kept drawing. That evening, the father found an old box in the closet. One he hadn't opened in years. Inside were things he hadn't known how to place anywhere else. A scarf, a folded note, a hospital bracelet he thought he'd thrown away. He sat on the bed holding the bracelet between his fingers, memories pressing in hard enough to steal his breath. From the hallway came a faint sound, the picture frame, not moving, just present. He stood, walked out, and looked at it. Straight, calm. He exhaled slowly. "You did enough," he said quietly, not caring how it sounded. "I've got it now." The apartment didn't respond, but something loosened inside him. That night, the girl stood at the balcony again, door open, city lights spread out below. She stayed well back from the railing, not because she was afraid, but because she understood distance now. Some lines aren't meant to be crossed. She rested her hand on the door frame, feeling the cool metal grounding herself. "You can go," she whispered. "Really?" The air didn't move. No sign. No answer. And that was the answer. Days passed, then weeks. The apartment became just an apartment again. The balcony became just a place to dry laundry, to watch sunsets, to breathe. The girl stopped feeling watched and started feeling supported, the way you feel after learning to ride a bike alone. The father slept deeper, laughed more. The picture frame stayed straight. One night, long after the danger had faded into memory, the girl woke briefly from sleep. No fear, no urgency, just awareness. She smiled into the darkness and rolled over, pulling the blanket up. Somewhere beyond walls and wind and doors, something that loved her understood it was no longer needed here. And quietly, without sound or ceremony, it let go. The first real test came quietly, the way the most important ones always do. Not at night, not with wind or darkness, but in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, when defenses are lower because nothing bad is supposed to happen. The girl was home early again, backpack on the floor, shoes kicked aside, sunlight filling the apartment with a warmth that felt earned. Ordinary moments are where protection matters most. If this story is holding you, stay with it. Subscribe and leave a like, gently, without breaking the calm. She poured herself a glass of water and stood by the counter, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Somewhere below, a horn blared. Somewhere nearby, someone laughed. Life, unremarkable and persistent. She walked toward the living room without thinking, eyes already drifting toward the balcony door out of habit. It was closed, locked, exactly as it should be. She nodded once, satisfied, then turned away. That's when she heard it. A sharp metallic snap. The sound came from above, sudden and wrong, followed by a scraping vibration that traveled down the building's bones. She froze. Her heart didn't race. It focused. The sound came again, metal against metal, followed by a low, sickening creak. She knew that sound. It wasn't the door. It was the railing. She moved quickly now, controlled but urgent, stepping toward the balcony window and peering out without opening anything. On the balcony above hers, a section of railing had shifted outward, not collapsed, not yet, but bent enough to change the angle, dangerous enough to matter. Someone must have leaned too hard, or corrosion finally gave way, a mistake waiting for the wrong moment. The girl stepped back, instinct screaming not to go closer. She grabbed her phone and called her father, hands steady despite the weight in her chest. "Dad," she said, "the balcony upstairs. Something's wrong." He listened. He always listened now. "Stay away from the door," he said immediately. "I'm calling the building manager." She obeyed without question. She sat on the couch, eyes fixed on the balcony, feeling that familiar presence return. Not urgent, not intense, but alert, watching with her. Minutes stretched. Then came voices from above. The neighbor. Someone else. Concerned murmurs. The scraping sound returned, louder this time, followed by a shout. The girl stood without realizing she had moved. Her chest tightened sharply now. This wasn't about her balcony. This wasn't about her door, but it was still close. Too close. The pressure swelled, different from before. Not a barrier, a push. She felt it clearly now, like a firm hand between her shoulder blades guiding her back. She took 2 steps away from the window just as a loud crack split the air. Metal screamed. Something heavy fell. The sound echoed down the side of the building, violent and final. The girl covered her ears, heart pounding. Silence followed, then chaos, shouts, doors opening, footsteps running, sirens in the distance. Her father arrived 20 minutes later, breathless, eyes wild as he pulled her into a hug. "You're okay," he said over and over, as much for himself as for her. She nodded against his chest. "I didn't go near it," she said softly. "I know," he replied. The building, manager explained later. The railing had been weakened for years, rust hidden beneath paint. It finally gave way when someone leaned on it to shake out a rug. No one was hurt. No one fell. The piece landed on an empty section of pavement. A few minutes later, and it would have been different. That night, the girl stood in her room looking out at the city through the glass. The pressure was gone again, completely, not resting, not waiting. Gone. She felt it in her bones. The work was finished. Not just paused, done. She placed her hand on the window, calm and steady. "You don't have to come back," she whispered. There was no response, and there didn't need to be. The apartment slept deeply that night. No watchfulness, no tension. Just walls, doors, and the quiet trust that comes after danger has truly passed. Somewhere, far from balconies and wind and metal railings, a presence that had stayed too long out of love finally allowed itself to leave. And it did so knowing one simple truth. The girl was ready now. The absence settled slowly. Not like a door closing, but like footsteps fading down a long hallway until you're no longer sure you ever heard them at all. The girl noticed it most in the mornings. The apartment no longer felt alert when she woke up. It simply existed, warm, still, neutral. That, she realized, was what safety was supposed to feel like. If this story is staying with you, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps these quiet moments continue, without disturbing them. She moved through her routine easily now. Breakfast, backpack, shoes by the door. The balcony door remained closed, locked, unquestioned. She barely looked at it anymore. Her father noticed the change, too. He stopped hovering, stopped listening for sounds that weren't there. Grief didn't vanish, but it softened, losing its sharp edges. One evening, he stood on the balcony alone for the first time since everything had happened. He didn't feel watched. He didn't feel guarded. He felt trusted. He leaned on the railing carefully, aware of the world below but not afraid of it. "She's okay," he said into the open air, not asking, stating. The air didn't answer. It didn't need to. Days turned into weeks. The memory of the open door became just that, a memory. Something that had happened, not something that might happen again. The girl stopped waking at night. Her dreams filled with ordinary things, school trips, birthday candles, running without looking back. Sometimes her mother appeared in them, but only in passing, smiling from a distance, already walking away. One afternoon, the girl came home to find the balcony door open. Her heart jumped, not with fear, but surprise. Her father stood nearby, adjusting a chair. "I'm airing the place out," he said quickly, seeing her freeze. She nodded, watched, waited. Nothing happened. No pressure, no warning, just air moving the curtains the way curtains are meant to move. She stepped forward slowly, standing beside him. Together, they looked out at the city. "It's okay," she said, more to herself than to him. He smiled. That night, she slept with her door open. The hallway light spilled softly into her room. The picture frame stayed straight. The apartment felt whole. Months later, during a quiet afternoon, the girl found the old photo album tucked away in a drawer. She sat on the floor flipping through pages, fingers tracing faces and moments frozen in time. When she reached a picture of her mother, standing on the balcony, younger and laughing, she paused. For the first time, the image didn't hurt. It felt complete. She closed the album and placed it back carefully, exactly where she'd found it. Some things are meant to be remembered, not revisited. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the city lights blinked on, the balcony door remained open for hours. Nothing crossed the threshold. Nothing tested the space. The girl passed by it without stopping, heading to her room. Her life, continuing forward. Somewhere far beyond doors and railings and silent nights, something that once stayed learned the hardest lesson love can teach: when to let go. And in that letting go, it finally rested. Time did what it always does when nothing interrupts it. It moved forward without asking permission. The girl grew into her days the way children do, quietly, without noticing the exact moment things change. The apartment aged with her. Small scratches on the walls, a loose cabinet hinge, the balcony door opening and closing 1,000 ordinary times without consequence. If this story is still walking beside you, consider subscribing and leaving a like. Some protections continue only when remembered. One late afternoon, nearly a year after the night the door first opened, the girl sat alone in the living room, homework spread across the table. Sunlight angled low, turning the dust in the air into gold. She was older now, taller, more certain of herself in ways she couldn't explain. She heard the balcony door open behind her, not abruptly, not wrong, just open. She didn't turn around. She finished writing the sentence she was on, set her pencil down neatly, and then looked. Her father stood there, holding a folded blanket. "I thought I'd sit outside for a bit," he said. She nodded. No tension, no pause in her breathing. She joined him, sitting a safe distance from the railing, legs tucked beneath her. They watched the city together, neither speaking for a long time. The Abbaye wind brushed past them, gentle, unchallenged. For the first time, the girl realized something clearly. The feeling she once relied on hadn't disappeared suddenly. It had faded gradually as she learned how to listen to herself instead. That night, she dreamed again. This time, her mother wasn't standing in the apartment. She wasn't on the balcony. She was farther away, walking through a bright space with no walls, no doors. She turned once, smiled, and kept going. The girl didn't call out. She didn't need to. Morning came soft and ordinary. The father left early for work. The girl prepared for school alone. As she slipped on her shoes, she paused at the balcony door, resting her hand briefly on the handle, not checking, acknowledging. "I've got it," she said quietly. The door stayed still. Weeks later, a class assignment asked her to write about someone who protected her. Other kids chose parents, teachers, older siblings. The girl stared at the blank page for a long time. Then she wrote about a feeling instead, about knowing when to stop, about listening when something doesn't feel right, about walking away before danger has to announce itself. Her teacher circled one line in red. "This sounds very mature for your age." The girl smiled when she read it. At home, the apartment remained peaceful. The balcony door opened and closed with purpose. The picture frame never tilted again. Whatever had once stood between her and the edge no longer needed to. She had learned where the edge was, and that was enough. When you understand where the danger ends, you don't need someone to block it for you. And somewhere beyond sight, beyond memory, a love that once stood watch rested fully at last, knowing it had done exactly what it was meant to do, and nothing more. The moment arrived without ceremony, the way real endings often do. No warning, no tension. Just a quiet realization that something had already changed. The girl felt it one evening while washing her hands in the bathroom, staring at her reflection as water ran warm over her fingers. She looked older again, not suddenly, naturally. And for the first time, the thought crossed her mind without sadness. I don't need anyone watching anymore. If this story continues to stay with you, subscribing and leaving a like helps these quiet truths keep finding their way to others. She dried her hands and walked into the living room. The balcony door was open, city air drifting in freely. Her father sat nearby reading, relaxed, no longer positioned between the door and her out of habit. The apartment no longer arranged itself around fear. It arranged itself around living. She stepped onto the balcony alone. The railing felt solid, reliable. The city below felt distant but real, a reminder of height rather than a threat of it. She leaned forward slightly, careful but unafraid, and watched the lights pulse like a living thing. For a brief moment, memory surfaced. Not the night the door opened, but the feeling of being guided back. The certainty. The pressure that had once kept her safe. It didn't return now. Instead, something else filled its place. Judgment. Awareness. Choice. She smiled softly. "I remember," she whispered, not to call anything back, but to honor it. Inside, her father watched her through the glass, heart steady. He felt no urge to intervene. That realization surprised him most of all. Trust, he understood, wasn't something you demanded from fear. It was something you earned by surviving it. Days later, the building announced renovations. Balcony railings would be reinforced, doors inspected, safety upgrades, long overdue. The father read the notice twice, then folded it carefully and placed it on the counter. Progress had a way of arriving late, but it still mattered. The girl watched workers from her window one afternoon, sparks flashing briefly as metal was secured and strengthened. She felt no anxiety, just distance. The work belonged to the building now, not to her. That night, she slept deeply. No dreams, no awakenings. The kind of sleep that belongs to people who trust the morning. And somewhere far beyond the apartment, beyond doors and balconies and the need to stand watch, something that had once stayed learned the final truth of protection. It isn't proven by presence, but by absence. When you can leave and know everything will still be okay. The girl woke at dawn, sunlight spilling across her room. She stretched, smiled, and began another, ordinary day, unaware that she was now carrying forward the very thing that once guarded her. Awareness, care, the quiet ability to step back when something doesn't feel right. That was the inheritance, and it was enough. The days passed, quiet but full. The girl moved through them with a sense of peace she hadn't realized she'd gained. Little by little, her world expanded. No longer bound by fears or protective forces unseen, she began to stand a little taller. She knew now, more than ever, that safety wasn't something given. It was something you carried within you, a quiet strength, unshakable and subtle. If this story resonates with you, stay close. Subscribing and leaving a like helps these moments of peace find their way to others. One evening, as the girl sat at her desk, the apartment silent around her, the sound of a knock at the door broke the stillness. It wasn't unexpected, but it was unusual. Her father opened it, and there, standing in the hallway, was the old neighbor from across the hall. She was holding a box, eyes wide with something between relief and regret. "I didn't know who else to ask," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "I've been having these dreams, strange ones, of the balcony, of someone standing there, watching." The girl stood up from her desk, feeling that familiar pressure return. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was something else, a quiet understanding. The neighbor continued, her voice wavering. "I thought I'd gotten past it, thought the building was just old. But now I don't know." The girl glanced toward the balcony. The door was closed, of course. Her father's eyes met hers, and in that silent exchange, she knew what she had to do. "It's okay," she said softly, turning back to the neighbor. "You don't need to be afraid anymore." The neighbor stepped inside, hesitantly, and the girl walked past her, standing at the threshold of the balcony door. She didn't open it. She just stood there, as calm as she could, manage, and said, "It's not about protection anymore. It's about trust. Let go of the fear. It's done." The neighbor's hands shook as she set the box down on the table. "I don't know how to stop being afraid." "You don't have to," the girl replied, her voice steady. "Just don't let it control you." She turned and walked toward the window, glancing out at the city below. The lights flickered in the distance, a reminder of how small the fears truly were. "We all have to learn, one way or another," she continued softly, "that everything we need is already here, inside." The neighbor stared at her, unsure. But for the first time in a long time, something in her posture shifted. The fear didn't go away, but it loosened. For the first time, she understood. The protection she was seeking wasn't something that could be handed over. It had to come from within. The girl smiled softly. "You'll be okay," she whispered. The neighbor nodded, almost imperceptibly, as if a weight had been lifted. That night, the girl slept soundly. No dreams, no restlessness. Just peace, the kind that comes when you finally accept that there's nothing left to fear. The balcony door remained closed, not as a barrier, but as a reminder. Everything was as it should be. The following morning, the neighbor was gone. The girl never saw her again. But the weight that had once clung to the apartment seemed to lift. The silence, once filled with tension, became just a silence. The girl knew it was done. The next step had begun. She stepped into the living room, looked at the balcony, and smiled to herself. The past was over. The future was waiting. As the days stretched on, life in the apartment began to settle into a kind of quiet normality that felt foreign at first, then familiar. The girl continued to grow, now almost fully aware of the strength she carried within her. The lessons learned from a past she could no longer look at with fear. It was no longer about survival. It was about living. And living, as she had come to understand, meant moving forward without constantly looking over your shoulder. Her father had begun to change too. Little by little, his shoulders relaxed. He stopped checking the lock so often, stopped pacing at night, listening for sounds that weren't there. He allowed the silence to stay, trusting it now the way he used to trust her mother's gentle presence. The apartment became a home again, a real home. They made dinner together some evenings, laughter filling the space where tension had once been. The balcony door stayed closed, but now it wasn't a symbol of fear. It was just a door. One afternoon, while the girl worked on a school project, her father came into the living room with a small box. It wasn't a large box, nothing special, just an old shoebox he'd found buried in the back of the closet. "I think this is yours," he said, handing it to her with a smile. She looked up, puzzled, but took the box in her hands. It was dusty, a little worn at the edges. She opened it carefully, wondering what it might be. Inside there were old photographs, notes, trinkets from days long past, things her mother had kept, things she had never thought to ask about. Her fingers brushed over the yellowed pages, the faint smell of old paper filling her nostrils. She didn't recognize many of the faces in the photos, but she felt an odd sense of connection to them. She smiled softly, as if meeting strangers she already knew. She turned a page, and then another, until she reached the last item at the bottom of the box. It was a small, weathered notebook. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed. But something about it called to her, an unspoken recognition she couldn't quite place. She opened it slowly, the pages flipping with a soft rustle. Handwritten notes filled the pages, her mother's neat, familiar handwriting filling every line. It was a journal of thoughts, reflections, and memories. But it wasn't just that. It was a story. Her mother had written the story of the balcony, of the place, of the moments that had defined her life here in this apartment. The quiet protection, the way she had stayed when no one else could. She had written about the girl even before she was born, about how she had watched her grow, about the love she had poured into every corner of the apartment, every inch of the space they had shared, and there, at the end, was a note addressed to her. "My dear, I know you don't need me to protect you anymore. But if you ever feel lost, if you ever feel afraid, just remember that I'm here. I will always be here, in the spaces between the walls, in the silence of the night. And when you're ready, you'll understand. You'll be ready to protect yourself, just like I did. You'll always have what you need inside you." The girl closed the notebook, her chest tight with emotion. The words her mother had written were both a gift and a farewell. She didn't cry, though the urge was there. She had already cried for the woman who had shaped her, for the mother who had always been just out of reach. Now, those tears were replaced by a kind of acceptance, a quiet understanding that came from knowing that love, true love, wasn't just in presence, it was in memory. It was in the strength that was passed down, in the way the girl now stood, unshaken. Her father, watching her from the door, smiled gently. "It's yours now, kiddo. All of it." She made sure of that. The girl nodded, clutching the notebook to her chest. She had never felt more complete. The sense of protection, the one that had once been so present, had shifted. It was no longer something outside her. It had always been part of her. She had become the protector, the one who could stand firm in the face of whatever came next. That night, as she prepared for bed, she placed the notebook on her bedside table. She didn't open it again, not yet, but she knew it would always be there, waiting for the moments when she needed to remember, when she needed to feel the quiet strength of a love that had once wrapped itself around her like a shield. The next morning, when the sun rose over the city, she stood by the balcony again. She didn't open the door, but she stood close, just close enough to feel the air, just close enough to remember. The city stretched out below her, full of possibilities, full of life. And in that moment, she understood. She didn't need anyone to guard her anymore. She had always had everything she needed inside her, and that, she realized, was the truest protection of all. The balcony door stayed closed, but this time, it was because it didn't need to be open for her to feel safe. The apartment had become home again, not because it was a place of protection, but because it was a place of trust, of growth, and of knowing that when the time came, she would always be ready to stand on her own. And the memory of those who had loved her? It stayed in the spaces between the walls, in the quiet hum of the apartment, in the moments that were now hers to carry forward. The last change was the one no one announces. It didn't arrive with a sound or a feeling or even a clear moment in time. It arrived disguised as normal life, the kind people wait years for without realizing it has already begun. The girl didn't notice it at first. She was too busy growing, too busy becoming someone who no longer needed to look over her shoulder when doors opened or wind passed through rooms. The apartment reflected that change. It stopped feeling like a place that held memories and became a place that made new ones. Mornings filled with light. Evenings filled with small routines. The balcony door opened and closed as often as any other door in the building, without tension, without weight. If this story has followed you quietly until now, subscribing and leaving a like helps keep these moments alive, the ones that don't shout, but stay. One evening, much later, the girl stood in the living room holding a jacket. She was older now, not a child anymore. Her father watched from the kitchen, leaning against the counter, noticing how natural it felt to see her there. Confident, grounded, unafraid of space. "I'll be back late," she said. "Studying with friends." He nodded. No hesitation. No warnings about doors or heights or checking in too often. Just trust. She paused at the balcony door before leaving, resting her hand on the handle out of habit, not fear. The city, beyond the glass, was alive, indifferent, full of movement. She smiled, not because she felt protected, but because she felt capable. As she left the apartment, the silence settled behind her, complete and honest. No presence lingering, no watchfulness remaining. The apartment didn't need it anymore. Hours later, her father stood alone on the balcony, night air cool against his skin. He thought of his wife, not as she was at the end, not as a memory shaped by loss, but as she had always been. Steady, loving, knowing when to step forward and when to step back. "You did good," he said quietly, unsure who he was speaking to or if he even needed an answer. The city offered none, and that was right. When the girl returned home that night, she walked through the apartment without pausing. She went to her room, changed, and lay down, exhaustion pulling her quickly toward sleep. No dreams came, no memories pressed in, just rest. The kind that belongs to people who are no longer waiting for something to happen. In the deepest part of the night, the balcony door moved slightly as air pressure shifted, just enough to make a familiar sound. The girl didn't wake, the apartment didn't react, nothing responded, because nothing needed to. Somewhere beyond time, beyond doors and glass and seventh floors, a love that had once stayed learned the final and hardest lesson. Protection is temporary, but strength is permanent. You don't stay forever. You stay long enough for someone to learn how to stand on their own. And when that moment comes, the greatest act of love is leaving quietly, without leaving fear behind. Morning arrived like it always does, light, ordinary. The girl woke, stretched, and began another day, carrying nothing but herself forward. The balcony door stood closed, not because it had to, but because finally it was just a door.